The Tom Woods Show, episode 1538.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, as you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been spreading some pretty terrible ideas, and she's wrong on just about everything. Well, I've put together the definitive smash of all of it. The Green New Deal, affordable housing, so-called, free college, high tax rates. It's in another free ebook, yes, a free ebook called AOC is Wrong, The Upside-Down World of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Grab your free copy at aociswrong.com. Hey, everybody, Tom Woods here. Gene Epstein is back with us today. Gene is former economics and book review editor at Barron's, formerly chief economist at the New York Stock Exchange, and right now the director of the Soho Forum, which hosts debates on many contentious and interesting topics in New York City. And that's one of the great things about living in the New York City area is that you get to attend these events very easily. Well, Gene himself was one of the debaters in his recent debate at the Soho Forum with Richard Wolff, professor emeritus of economics at the University of Massachusetts, and they were debating the following resolution: socialism is preferable to capitalism as an economic system that promotes freedom, equality, and prosperity. The results turned out very much in Gene's favor. They began with 25% supporting that resolution, ending with 24.5% supporting that resolution. But being opposed to the resolution, therefore agreeing with Gene, went from approximately 49% all the way up to 71%, I believe. So it was a big, big jump for Gene. And if you're wondering why it doesn't add up to 100%, there are still some undecideds. So I wanted to talk to Gene about this debate. Now, I know he's done that. He's done the rounds a bit on the podcast circuit, and I was in Austria at the time. But I dare say you're going to enjoy this particular version. There's a lot to mine from this debate. And, of course, it'll all be linked on the show notes page, tomwoods.com/1538. Gene, welcome back.
Good to be back, Tom, and welcome back to you from Vienna, where you got that Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations.
Thank you, Gene, very much.
Yeah.
And I'd like to tell people that although this episode is being released on November 20th, a Wednesday, 2019,
yes,
we are recording it on the 19th, which is, in fact, Gene's 75th birthday. So best birthday wishes to you, Gene.
Thank you, Tom. Still alive at 75 was the theme of my party on Sunday. Tom was invited. He had a perfect excuse for not being able to make it. He was coming back from Vienna, where he got his prize. But you did give me a great YouTube greeting, Tom, which meant a lot to me. And also, by the way, thank you very much for doing a superb interview with the great Ron Paul. I take inspiration from the fact that he is 84 and every bit as sharp as ever. So that gives me at least another 9 years.
Well, I'm sure you'll have many more. I will. In fact, what I think I'll do is after the closing music for this episode, we'll play the audio of the video clip I sent for your party because I couldn't be there, but I recorded a clip of myself talking about you in both a roast and a toast style. I recorded it in the Vienna airport. I sent it because I'd been conspiring with your son, Jim, who's also been on this show before.
Yes.
Indeed. And he put me in touch with somebody who knew technically how to make that work. So I sent that video. So I'll play that for the folks. The other thing about Ron Paul, that's episode 1535. Yeah. I got there in Texas the night before we had the big event where I did that live interview with him. And I got to be over at his house, and we had a private meeting for about a half hour. And I would say, because I stay in touch with him, but not a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And you're right, he is 84. And I was wondering, to be perfectly blunt, would I detect any even slight deterioration of his faculties? I was curious.
Yeah.
Not a bit. Okay. Nothing. He is exactly the same as he was in the presidential campaigns. Every bit as sharp and witty and I was so happy about that. The guy is immortal or invincible or something. But anyway, I hope Gene Epstein is the same.
Amazing. And that's good, Tom, because I rely on you in the years to come. Whenever you come around, give me the assessment, the Tom Woods assessment. Are you every bit as sharp or slightly less so? because I'd be grateful for a totally candid assessment. So I look forward to that.
All right, let's talk about your debate.
Sure.
I've already set it up for the folks.
Sure.
You and Richard Wolff at the Soho Forum.
Yeah.
I'll link, of course, we're going to link on the show notes page to how you can listen to the debate, because I think you really should. Let me start off with a comment, Gene, if I may.
Please.
And that is, I have been perfectly willing to acknowledge when people I disagree with perform very well at the Soho Forum.
Yeah.
So, for example, I side with Bob Murphy, but I thought George Selgin did a terrific job in his debate.
Yeah.
Likewise, I side with Randy Barnett, but I thought I can't remember the other fellow's last name. I thought something starts with a D.
Yeah.
But
Cornell
anyway,
professor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he did a good job. I can't remember his name, but I remember thinking, I don't agree with this guy, but he's doing an excellent job. So it's not that I just want to make clear from the outset.
Please,
it's not that I just arbitrarily say that people I disagree with are bad debaters. Not so.
No.
But what I want to say in this case is I was shocked at what a weak job I thought Richard Wolff did. I thought most of his presentation was just moral outrage and sheer assertion.
Yeah.
No attempt to prove anything, sheer assertion. And then not even really an attempt to indicate that he even understands your position, Gene. And in particular, when he went into this long tirade about how unstable capitalism is and that every 4 to 7 years you get a downturn, I would think a debater steeped in both sides, which I never expect the other side to be. We know what they say, but they almost never know what we say. I would have thought somebody like that would say, now listen, I know Gene's going to get up here and tell you that the Federal Reserve is the cause of this instability and it's not capitalism's fault. But the reason that argument fails is there was not even if you hadn't forced the issue, he wouldn't have even mentioned the Federal Reserve in his whole presentation. So I was very, very underwhelmed, and I thought I would be blown away, like I frankly was by, as I said, these two other debaters I disagree with. Not so. So what was your overall impression?
Yeah, well, let me take remarks back to point. It's interesting that you discerningly point out that those two debates, you could see that there was a very formidable person on the other side whom you had to respect. And I quite agree with you about those two. Interesting that you point that out. So I guess, geniuses like us think alike, Tom. Beyond that, of course, it was interesting. I'm going to lead up to my main observation about your somewhat depressing point, which is absolutely valid. But of course, Richard is somebody I did read, and he had literally, and of course I did say this in my rebuttal, that Richard literally thought that the downturn, the Great Recession of 08-09, was attributable to a collapse in consumer spending. And that indeed he'd said that for years, for decades, consumers had to keep borrowing and borrowing up to the hilt. And finally, they were tapped out. And that's why the Great Recession happened. And I pointed out that, and by the way, what's interesting about the conventional national income accounts is that often, as Bob Murphy, the great Bob Murphy, has shown us, they can be cited quite fairly to make very good points on the free market side. I pointed out that consumer spending was continuing to increase through the fourth quarter of 2007, increasing just before the downturn happened. So how could you possibly talk about something increasing, causing that kind of collapse? So I did say that, and indeed I had read Richard. I knew pretty much back to front what he was going to say. With respect to your larger point, it bothers me that that's the case. I'm almost sorry I didn't say, at least toward the tail end of the debate, this is the guy who the New York Times has called the most prominent, perhaps the most prominent Marxist economist in the country. Cornell West, who many people have heard of, has called Richard Wolff our greatest socialist economist, a PhD from Yale, an undergraduate of Harvard, just like Tom Woods, an undergraduate. Sorry, you're an undergraduate of Harvard, Tom, because Columbia PhD. Yeah, indeed. And then, of course, as he wants you to know, he studied at Stanford under the very illustrious Marxist economist Paul Baran. So I wanted to tell people, look, whatever you might think, negatively or positively, of what you heard from Richard Wolff's presentation this evening, his attempt to combat my various points in debater style, I think it's not going to get any better than this. This is the best you're going to get. Now, I guess if I had said that, I might have had to confess that even Bhaskar Sankara, not nearly as learned, a guy much younger, who debated me, a year ago, October, even he put up a better fight. So I guess I would have had to admit that when I debated Bhaskar, afterwards I did, after I debated, I was told, pick on somebody your own size, Epstein. The guy is less than half your age. What does he know? And of course, he had a big book contract with Basic Books to bring out a book that is now called the Socialist Manifesto. He brought out Jacobin Magazine. So one would think he's a brilliant live wire who could easily best me in a debate. But but I'm not picking on somebody my own size. So that's why I went after Richard Wolff. And much to my dismay and disappointment, just as you said, Tom, he came off as a preening narcissist for much of the evening. So you're right.
And, you and I don't like to call people names. Well, that's not true. I like to call people names. You don't. But at least when I call people names, I feel bad about it. I can say that about my moral compass. All right. But in this case,
I like to call people. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Because when you said that just now about him, I thought, well, that's not very Gene Epstein-like. But then I thought back to the tone that both of you adopted.
Yeah.
He was. It's one thing to be heated in a debate, but he was just belligerent and unfriendly.
Yeah.
He had no warmth whatsoever. He had all the warmth of a guy pushing a gurney in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
He had no warmth whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And you were very graciously trying to concede where he made a point or where you could find common ground.
Oh, yeah.
And then at the end, he says, just to show how strong socialism is, just note how many times Gene Epstein said he agreed with me. Here you are being gracious, and he uses that against you. I thought, what a low-life dirtbag this guy is. But also, you were charming, and there was none of that in this guy. He just came off as and maybe it's because his blood is just boiling with moral outrage. Well, so is ours.
Yeah.
But at least we can be human beings.
Yes. Well, there too, there's an interesting backstory on that. Number one, while you and Dave Smith and others did not come down on me for the way I seemed, at least certainly did, lose my temper at times when I debated Bhaskar Sankara on a similar issue, socialism and freedom in that case. I did get annoyed with the young man. Dave Smith likes to joke that every once in a while when his wife says, learn some economics, Bhaskar, that's echoing me. So I think that I could have come off better that time, although somebody in my fan base said, you had it right, that was just being fiery and passionate. A lot of the older people, often including my son Jim, actually said, you did not gain any ground by losing your temper with Bhaskar, even though they acknowledge that I didn't lose my temper to the point of incoherence. If you actually read what I wrote or you just listen to the content, I kept on point with Bhaskar, and I did indeed win the debate, in that case, by 10 percentage points, according to Oxford-style voting. With Richard, I won by 20 percentage points, according to Oxford-style voting, and I think it probably helped that, as in fact, a couple of people said, you were more charming. And I said, well, I hope I didn't just win on charm. I hope I won on substance as well. But obviously, I think I played it right, although and then a few other people who I can never please said, you were too nice to the guy. I can never get it right. Too harsh with Bhaskar, too nice with Richard. But also, with respect to agreeing with him whenever I could, and indeed maybe 7 or 8 times I said I agree with him over the course of the debate, and I was criticized for that. Like, tactically, why are you doing that? And notice that he's claiming credit for that. I thought, and actually still feel, what I said in my first few words when I made the summation. I said, Richard and I do indeed agree about a lot. That's because we are both radicals. We are both radicals, and we see a lot that has to be changed, but Richard wants us to march in exactly the wrong direction. And so I wanted to make a lot of that, and I think it was the right tack to take. Of course, all of it was valid. When Richard talked about the medical monopoly, the healthcare monopoly, I said, of course, it exists. And actually, Nick Gillespie, who was the moderator, jumped in and said, and of course, you want more free market. Nick, by the way, as moderator, had been instructed by me in advance. He'd done he'd moderated before when I debated Social Security Trust Fund. I told Nick, if anything, make it look as though you're biased in favor of Richard. If anything, because sometimes it'll be a little confusing. How is this going to sound? Well, lean against me. So a couple of people complained to me that, that moderator, he let Richard talk on and on whenever he wanted to make a point. In your case, several times, he's making it difficult for you to finish what you're saying. This was in the more extemporaneous back and forth. And I said, well, I hope the socialists in the audience, there were easily like about 150 of them in a hall of over 400. I said, I hope the socialists in the audience did have that impression, that the moderators is, if anything, making it more difficult for the capitalist side to get his points across. I thought that was fine with me. But actually, the other part of it, which is funny, is this, another part of the backstory. I get a little concerned walking into a debate that I'm going to do at the Soul Forum. I do a lot of joking and blabbing with the volunteers and with everybody going into the debate, and I get a little worried. In fact, now I'm getting a little hoarse right now. I get a little worried that I'm going to get too hoarse to do the debate. So I tell everybody, no, I'm deaf and dumb. I can't talk. I want to just save my voice for the debate. So I actually sat before the debate began, about 45 minutes before. I sat on the stage and just, pensively looked at my notes and so on. But Richard saw me, came right up to the stage and sat right next to me. And for 45 minutes, we actually had a very amicable conversation. He is, we're both septuagenarian Jewish guys. And coincidentally, I had studied Marxist imperialism at the New School under the Marxist economist Harry Magdoff, and Richard had Harry Magdoff as a foster father. So we knew a lot of the same people, and we were getting very friendly. Look, in a way, almost I have my side. Maybe people want to watch the debate between me and Richard and then see how I got angry at Bhaskar. So he is actually, at his core, a nice guy, even though I guess because I started out by quoting copiously from his book, I started to sort of knock his cage. And by the way, you talk about listening to it. Last I checked, about 2 hours ago, the video on YouTube was up to 105,000 viewings. And so it's snowballing up. And so I'm very gratified about that, given the fact Richard has 90,000 Twitter followers. A lot of his people are watching it, and a lot of them are responding. So at least I'm reaching them. That's very gratifying.
All right, let's talk about some specifics.
Sure.
I spotted a couple of what seemed to me to be contradictions.
Okay.
And the thing is, you obviously spotted them too.
Yes.
But you cited Wolf's book from 7 years ago. 7 years is not exactly a lifetime ago, I mean, it's not yesterday, but it's not a lifetime.
Tom, yes, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, well, so anyway, so you were taking him seriously, and you were saying that you're talking about worker-owned enterprises and democratizing the workplace and this and that, and that's your vision of socialism. And then you went on to describe all the problems with that. And of course, one problem, we'll get to that. We'll come back to that. But then he said, it's ridiculous to try to claim that there's one socialism or that any of us would try to predict what it's going to look like. Mm-hmm. But he spent the entire evening predicting what it was going to look like. Namely, there would be more worker-controlled firms. So, I mean, I don't understand that point at all. Wow. The second thing is he claims that he does not support a top-down, state-directed socialism, and he repudiates all those sorts of things. Yeah. But over the course of the evening, he nevertheless could not help himself. I mean, the real Richard Wolff came out. I mean, he more or less did at times seem to defend those regimes, such that you very humorously, he didn't pick up on the humor because he doesn't detect subtlety, let's put it that way. But you very humorously said, I apologize. I mean, it looks like I've kind of accidentally painted Richard into a corner because now he's resorting to defending these regimes. And that's not what he believes. He's not supposed to be defending those regimes. He believes in a bottom-up solution. So it was so great because you were very gracious, but at the same time, condescendingly reminding him what he's supposed to believe.
Yeah. Yes. Well, first of all, Tom, you make me laugh when you say that, admittedly, it was written 7 years ago. And Richard, by the way, is 77. So it was published when he was 70 years old 7 years ago. And
it was a youthful indiscretion, Gene,
right.
When he was but a lad of 70.
Tom, let me hold your feet to the fire. I want to tell you, if you want to repudiate any of your previous books, then you should do so, because if somebody is going to debate you on the causes of the Great Recession and quote from your book Meltdown, I hope you're not going to say, hey, that book was 10 years ago. What do you want?
I would have the decency of telling them before the debate, don't cite that book because it's just going to be a waste of time.
Thank you, Tom. Exactly. You would say. And by the way, what comes to mind, just to digress a bit, the brilliant libertarian, so to speak, libertarian Harvard philosopher Robert Nozick did have a habit of repudiating his books, although you had to read his subsequent books very carefully to find, for example, that in one of his books, he specifically repudiated his book on libertarianism, Anarchy, Stoughton, Utopia. So there is precedent for that. And it's perfectly okay to repudiate a whole book that you wrote, so long as you make that clear. You can gain, Tom Woods can gain credit, gain points for what a flexible thinker he is. I no longer believe in what I wrote in that book. So we agree about that, Tom. So you were even being a bit facetious that I said jokingly after I had quoted copiously from Wolf's book and took him seriously and made sure that I got him right. And I was actually waiting for him to sort of hit back at me by saying, oh, he read that out of context, or make some kind of crazy rationalizations and equivocations about what he had actually said in the book. Instead of that, he gets up and says, a book is like a kid. I didn't recognize anything I wrote. There are many socialisms. I'm not predicting the future, all of that. And that was my first moment that evening by realizing for sure that this was going to be sort of a case in which I'm going to sort of chase him around the ring with statements he's going to make. I already had an inkling of that because he was the affirmative, so he went first. I gave him 17 and a half minutes, by the way, because I had to give myself 17 and a half minutes, somewhat longer than I usually give debaters. I usually give them at most 15, sometimes 12 minutes, although 15 minutes has been the norm. And that was because in crafting my remarks, and by the way, my advice to all debaters is that the main reason, this is my bragging moment, the main reason why I've had 5 debates at the Solo Forum, taken the negative in all 5 cases, and won all 5 debates according to Oxford-style rules, the main reason is that I do my homework. I become very familiar with what this person has written and said about the topic so that I'm going to have few surprises. And that enables me to craft my remarks even though I'm going to go second. I don't have to sit there furiously taking notes to hear the initial statement for the affirmative when I'm taking the negative. I don't have to do that because I'm very familiar with what the person thinks. But sitting there listening to Richard and his 17 and a half minutes, I was somewhat astonished that it was so much throat clearing of going into some crazy history about socialism and all that. And Nick, the moderator, was actually concerned that Richard was confusing the audience about what the resolution was all about. By the way,
I noticed Nick kept repeating the resolution as if to. I mean, you were clearly staying on point. And you're right. We got from Wolf a whole lot of stuff about the New Deal coalition and the history of socialism. It's completely irrelevant to the debate.
Yes. No. Actually, I was on Dave's show, Dave Smith's show, and Dave was appalled at so many of the side points that Richard was making. And I said, well, look, let's talk about those side points, Dave, because they have nothing to do with the debate. But of course, obviously, interesting questions arise. We are talking about a guy, Richard Wolff, who's lived through these times. Again, 77 years old. He's lived through the same times that I've lived through, and he apparently believes that the New Deal was abrogated, was reversed over time in the 50s, 60s, between the departure of Roosevelt and the current time. He actually believes, I guess, that there was no LBJ Great Society. There was no enormous expansion of the welfare state. He believes that it was like all the legendary idea that Reagan rolled back anything much in the welfare state is, for Richard, something that happened for 70 years. I mean, he's that much out of touch with just practical reality. This is one of the stories he told that evening, and I guess it's important to mention it for those who want to listen to the debate, because I didn't pick up on that point at all because it was completely irrelevant to the discussion, and I wanted to save my time and remarks for what was actually to the point. And so I didn't mention it. But again, my mouth was agape that Richard actually thinks has such a persecution complex that he actually thinks the dominance of government, the dominance of the welfare state was actually reversed over the last 70 years rather than greatly enhanced. But getting to your point finally, Tom, about the fact that Richard clearly then, once he decided to back away from his book, once he said that socialism can mean many things, I realized I have to be ready on all fronts to deal with whatever he's going to bring up. And his worst moment, as you may recall, Tom, his worst moment was when, what was it? Oh, yeah, this is an odd part of the evening. A question was asked about the non-aggression principle and freedom under capitalism and socialism. And Richard, sitting not far from me, was shrugging, and he said, I don't want to answer that question. He actually muttered it, and Nick didn't hear him because Nick was up at the podium. So I jumped in and I said, I'm going to answer that question for Richard. And Nick said, well, what are you doing, Gene, stepping in because the question? No, I said, Nick, Richard said he wants me to answer that question. So I jumped in and I said, you know what, Richard? What Richard would say in answer to your question about the non-aggression principle and freedom under capitalism and socialism, what he's going to say is that you have the freedom to starve under free market capitalism. That if you don't get a job, you're going to starve. And therefore, there's no freedom under capitalism because unless you work for a capitalist, you're going to starve. And that's what Richard is going to say. And then I tossed up, somehow, all the starvation tends to take place in socialist economies and socialist societies. And so then I shut up. And then Richard pounced and he said, I've heard all that stuff about all those deaths under socialism. And how about all the deaths due to capitalist wars? I don't know if you remember that point, because I was criticized for that by Dave. He said, how about all the people who killed World War I, World War II because of those capitalist wars? And so I missed an opportunity. Dave Smith was criticizing me for that. I should have argued with him about whether those wars were actually capitalist or not.
Right, of course. What a dumb way for him to think.
Yeah, well, yes. Well,
I mean, if they're capitalist wars, how come Gene Epstein's dead set against them?
Well,
I mean, isn't he the least bit curious about that? Like, the guy is the most uncurious person in the world. He has no curiosity beyond his little bubble.
Right. Well, yeah. No. And I said, I decided. I picked my spot and I said, so you might criticize me too, Tom, for missing that opportunity. I thought we'd go down a rabbit hole about whether those were capitalist or not.
Right.
You know, it's funny, as I jokingly say, I've made a virtue out of the fact that I was born to communism, that I spent my teenage years as a democratic socialist and into my 20s, that intellectual depravity that I dwelt in for so long, that I've made into a virtue. But, and my fellow libertarians are in awe of me that I have such a dramatic background. You know, Bob Murphy said, my God, those stories he can come up with, the FBI following his mother around. But Dave said, hey, look, Gene, that obviously means that you're you have a lot of grounding in debating socialists. That gives you an advantage because you've been there and done that. And indeed, in this particular case, I used to argue with my mother's boyfriends, who were, of course, all staunch communists. And I knew their whole mantra about capitalist wars. And I was anticipating, oh my God, I'm going to be arguing with one of my mother's boyfriends again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but also you would be arguing over definitions. Like, I mean,
sure.
When there's a monopolistic institution waging, aggression on something else, is that even capital? I mean, then you're just arguing definition. I can understand why you don't want to jump into that.
Okay. So go ahead, get on. But,
all right, but let's go on to the.
Tom, let me just finish. Let me just say that I did. Just let me repeat that, Tom, if you recall. What I did say was that, Richard, I'm against those wars too. Yet another time when I'm agreeing with Richard, all those people killed, and there were 2 million people killed in the Iraqi war. Richard, the difference is that this was mass slaughter that governments committed against their own citizens. Hopefully, Tom, you'll say, that's a good point that I made against Richard. Yes.
Okay. Look, I think you did it. I think you did a great job against the guy. I thought your opening statement absolutely killed him. Your opening statement, because you stayed on point, unlike him telling stories. You stayed on point. Yeah. He sounded like he had a bunch of slogans and a bunch of assertions. And especially just something simple like, how does he not know the trend in consumer spending on the eve of the recession?
Well,
when that's going to be, because he's stuck in theory. That's the thing. Isn't that funny? The Austrians supposedly are just basking in their theory and they're not looking at empirical evidence. But he was so basking in Marxist theory, he didn't even bother to look at the trend in consumer spending. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, indeed.
Now, this is not, in talking to you, it should be clear enough that we're not right now refuting socialism. We're just reviewing your debate. That's a separate thing. So I'm not expecting you to do. I want people to go listen.
And
to
I want you to hold my feet to the fire. Absolutely, I want you to hold my feet to the fire about what I might have done better, because I can always learn. So
the one thing that I would have done more of in that opening statement is I would have pounded a little harder on the Fed and said, notice that Richard failed to mention the Federal Reserve. That's true of the entire American establishment, and how interesting that it's also true of the Marxists. What is it about this institution that nobody wants to talk about it except us? And then secondly, to stand here and lecture us about the alleged instability of capitalism as if I've got no response to that, without even trying to anticipate my answer, without even mentioning the Federal Reserve. I don't understand. That's just malpractice that's being perpetrated on the audience. But fair enough.
I agree with you. No, I agree with you, Tom. I could always use the excuse and say that, when you're up there, you got a lot of balls in the air and there's.
Gene, I'm not criticizing because you did. But I want you to understand, you did plenty of things in that opening statement that I wouldn't have done that were great, that I wouldn't have thought of. So on balance.
I wanted to think that I was on balance. I did great. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, indeed. I want to build on your point, by the way, and say that when I thought in terms of a couple of things that I'm just thinking, God, I should have said that. The truth of the matter is that Richard wants to keep whatever socialism he wants. Of course, that's obviously a moving target. He wants to keep the Federal Reserve. He wants to keep the monetary system. So we're going to have booms and busts that are at least as bad under his. I could have said that as well and almost should have. So I missed that opportunity for sure. You were going to say, Tom, anything else you wanted to bring up? Go ahead.
Well, yes, because if he's going to talk about workers democratizing the workplace and comparing the workplace to a relationship between a king and subjects, it's just astonishing to me. But you made the simple, obvious, logistical point that if we're all going to make all the decisions. First of all, Jeff Deist posted the other day, he said, and I can't use the word he used, but he said, look, most workers would have no idea what to do, and they would make a cluster you-know-what out of it if they tried. Okay. Let's just face it. But you pointed out, and by the way, then Richard came at you and said, because you were talking about the sheer impracticality of this. For one thing, people would be in meetings. You were saying that if you had 60 people, just 60 people, and you were arguing one point, and each person had 10 minutes or something, it would take 10 hours to make one decision. Rothbard talks about this in The Betrayal of the American Right, because he's talking about participatory democracy and how the left was trying to use it. He said, the meeting became all of life. So you were pointing that out to him. And he just dismissed it, didn't even bother to address it. And then he said, Gene's arguments sound like the same sorts of arguments we've heard against political democracy. The masses aren't smart enough or whatever. Yeah, and come on, Gene. Now, first of all, the masses clearly and obviously aren't smart enough. And by his own admission, why'd they vote for Donald Trump? By his own, hello. But secondly, yeah, you know what? I'm not smart enough. I have a PhD from Columbia, and as you said, an undergrad from Harvard. I'm not smart enough to make decisions for a firm when I'm just some guy who sweeps the floor. How would I know? On what basis would I make those decisions?
Or to put, of course, I probably would have used the rhetorical ploy and say maybe they're too smart. Maybe they're smart enough to recognize that they can't mind everybody else's business, and that there has to be a division of labor in this regard. Sure, absolutely. And what's interesting is that I did. Richard and Bhaskar actually teamed up the following week to debate. I found Bhaskar was at least conceding that, we don't want everybody's life to consist of meetings. And so we're just going to have representatives. So, of course, obviously, I also said, of course, what's going to happen is that we're not going to have the tyranny of the majority anyway. We're not going to have
you'll have that's what'll wind up. It'll wind up becoming an oligarchy of some kind.
Sure. Of course, because there won't be enough hours in the day. We're going to give these people a lot of power, and they're going to be ruling over us. But then, again, let me insist, of course, that I did say several times, and I did go over my old mantra by now because I used it. I went over it with Bhaskar, which is that we already have lots of people in business for themselves. We already have worker co-ops. We already have a lot of instances in which people want to work in places where, as in Whole Foods, for example, which John Mackey still continues to run in that same way. More worker participation for people who take more interest in their work. And we could evolve potentially to more worker-run firms. It's perfectly compatible under capitalism, and it's perfectly possible if people want it, if it does indeed speak to deep needs and desires. So that limited form of worker ownership participation, that's almost an old story. I don't want to work for any bosses. I want to be in business for myself. And I want to work with a group of people, and so on. All of that is very possible under capitalism. And if that's all Richard really wants, he doesn't want these kings of the workplace and to have bosses and all the rest of it, then we can have it. We can all have it if that's what we truly want. But some of us would prefer, as I did during my working life, to allow the people at Barron's and the people at News Corp, which owned me most of the time, to take on the headaches of running the play and making all the decisions beyond me about running the place and letting me do my thing and earn a decent salary in the process. And so that's another choice that we make. And obviously, these people aren't our kings so long as we decide and so long as the economy provides us with alternative means of employment, which in the vast majority of cases, it does. And so, of course, that's the other key card that I wanted to play and wanted to make clear, because I thought I was mainly trying to address the socialists in the audience, to try to speak to their feelings. I was also criticized that I didn't praise capitalism enough, and that I said, even our flawed system of capitalism that's heavily rigged in favor of the powerful is preferable by far to what Richard wants to bring about. It's preferable by far. We have a flawed system, but still it's something we support, and indeed we need more capitalism and not less. We do need radical change, but radical change in the capitalist direction. So I was trying to convey to the young people in the audience, I'm as outraged as Richard is about so much that goes on in our society, so many things that actually do shaft people of limited means.
Well, there's a lot more we can talk about. Your points about exercising freedom of speech when the resources are going to be democratically directed, which of course means that if you happen to belong to a despised minority, good luck getting your point of view out, because you won't be able to get access to the resources.
Yes.
He never addressed that, other than to, in passing, suggest that worrying about the government is just so old-fashioned. We're not talking about the government. We're talking about... Okay, well, then, all right, if you don't like the word government, we'll call it a banana, all right? Whatever. It's something. Something is in charge of deciding what the majority allegedly wants, and whatever that something is, whether it's the government or a banana or whatever that thing is very likely to be biased in the direction of what the majority wants. If we that's why, I understand the problems with the Constitution and all that, but in principle, that's why there's a First Amendment to the Constitution, so that won't be up for a vote.
Yeah.
Right? That will not be up for a vote. And that's what makes private property great, is that once you own that property, nobody votes on it.
Yeah.
It's yours. It doesn't matter if 99% of the public hates you. Mm-hmm. It's still your property, and you can use it to convey your ideas.
Well, you used exactly. I mean, you stir in me, Tom, my memory of that key moment in which I began to cross over from being that oxymoron. An oxymoron is a married bachelor, a contradiction in terms. I was a libertarian socialist, just as Noam Chomsky called himself a libertarian socialist. And then reading Rothbard, it was really when Rothbard put a fine point on the issue by saying that anybody in charge of scarce resources with respect to the exercise of freedom of speech or the building of new mosques or any expression of dissident opinion, anybody in charge is going to have to ration the resource. Those tough decisions are going to have to be made, even on the part of somebody who's like on the nice side, who isn't a power-hungry, completely narrow-minded lunatic. Or if the majority is voting on it, which of course is a fantasy, since nobody's going to keep up with those decisions, that even the majority has got to be told, hey, we can't vote in all of these things because there just ain't enough resources for these things. We live in a world of scarcity. And so that fine point on it, oddly, was the thing where the light bulb went off in my head completely. Because I think maybe in my dull brain prior to that, we libertarian socialists used to think, well, we'll just make sure that anybody who wants to publish a book, anybody who wants to build a chapel to the pagan gods, anybody who wants to express himself will be able to, but obviously only in the land of cocaine, I think the way Mises put it, clearly we will have to ration resources. And I stressed that point in my presentation. And then when I talked about the stifling of innovation with all of these committees in charge of funding and in charge of labor, that they would not only have the excuse that we've got limited resources, so we can't fund Steve Jobs' crazy idea for a smartphone that threatens so many industries. With their product, we can't do that. And besides, that's another great excuse they would legitimately have. Most new ideas never work out anyway, which is actually, of course, true. Most new ideas don't work out. And so they would have cardinal excuses that we could all take seriously for choking off freedom of speech and for choking off innovation.
Well, we're going to call it quits right there, and I'm going to urge people to check out thesohoforum.org for future debates.
Also, let me just hasten to say that in keeping with my age, I happily have Walter Block, 78 years old, 3 years older than I, finally defending his eviction theory having to do with abortion, a matinee on Sunday, December 8th at 3 o'clock, our very first matinee, December 8th. He's going to be debating a young woman named Carrie Baldwin, who claims to be a Rothbardian in many ways, but who's going to take him on. So that's December 8th at the Soho Forum. Please come.
Okay, so we'll link to the Soho Forum and to this particular debate that you and I have been talking about today at tomwoods.com/1538. All right. Mm-hmm. Happy birthday again, Gene. Thanks for your time.
And I look forward to your roast, Tom, which you're going to play. Bye-bye, Tom.
All right, folks, tomorrow we've got a debate analysis episode with Lou Rockwell, because tonight, that is Wednesday, November 20th, 2019, there's another Democratic Party presidential debate, and Lou Rockwell and I are going to be commenting on it tomorrow. So you will not want to miss that. Make sure you have subscribed. Just head over to tomwoods.com/Apple, and you can easily subscribe to The Tom Woods Show. Costs you nothing, of course. Thanks for listening.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Well, Gene, it's your 75th birthday, and that is an amazing milestone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. I am in the Vienna airport right now, heading to Munich and then back to the United States. So I just could not make this happen. But I did want to say to you, because I appreciate you very much. There aren't many guests I have on the Tom Woods Show of whom I can ask a question, go downstairs, make a sandwich, eat that sandwich, squeeze my own orange juice, drink the juice, mow the lawn, come back inside, put my headphones back on, and hear the guest saying, "Now, Tom, to answer your question, I also appreciate all the emails I receive about maybe things in the show that I could have done better or little mistakes I made. Dear Tom, I want you to remember there's an umlaut over the U in such and such person's name." Nobody other than Gene Epstein is going to let me know these things. But all the same, Gene, in all seriousness, I appreciate you very much. You're a very, very good man. You're loyal to your friends. You're a devoted servant of the cause. Really fantastic and entertaining debater, extremely knowledgeable. You're the person I go to when I'm completely stumped. And may you have 75 more, Gene.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.